most famous death in history is the death of Jesus of Nazareth. 2,000 years ago, in 1st century Jerusalem, he was crucified by the Romans. The Gospels tell us he was buried in a tomb. And 2 days later, Mary Magdalene, one of his closest disciples, found the tomb empty. But according to the Gospel of Matthew, there was another story circulating after Jesus' death. And though the Gospel calls it a lie, it was rumored that Jesus' disciples secretly took their master's body, presumably to give him a permanent burial. If this is true, according to 1st century burial practices in Jerusalem, Jesus' body would have been taken to a rock-hewn family tomb. Given that he was crucified for insurrection, the reburial would have been done in secret by his closest disciples. Jesus' body would have been shrouded and left to decompose. 1 year later, his disciples would have returned, this time joined by his family for the final burial ceremony. Mary, Jesus' mother, would have attended the ceremony. Mary Magdalene would also have been there. His brothers, Simon, Joseph, Judah, and James would have prepared Jesus' bones for the final burial, placing them in a limestone coffin called an ossuary. Jesus' name would have been inscribed on the side. His ossuary would then have been placed in a niche in the inner chamber, sealed away forever, deep inside his family tomb.
Before I begin the video, I just want to take a quick moment to say that I've always tried to be incredibly careful when I make these videos. These topics can be difficult to discuss, and it's really easy to upset people without even meaning to do so. I can't tell you how many videos I put on private or just never published because I questioned some aspect of that video. Which is why I've opened this channel to memberships where members would have access to all of those videos, numerous exclusive videos made just for channel members, along with early access and sneak peeks to my upcoming videos. However, if memberships aren't for you, you can always support this channel by leaving a tip in the tip jar by clicking on the thanks option, or just hitting the like button because it really does go a long way to help. I appreciate each and every one of you, so with that being said, grab a cup of coffee and let's get into the video, shall we? Today, I want to discuss something a little different than the type of things that I've traditionally talked about on this channel. I've debated making this video for a long time. I'm not quite sure how the majority of people are going to react to it. I just want to make it clear that I'm not making this video to cause anyone to question their faith or to try to discredit the Christian religion at all. If anything, this video is ironically quite the opposite of that. I'm going to discuss some fairly controversial things in this video. All I can ask is for you to watch this video with an open mind. So, with that being said, I'd like to talk to you about how I think that there is very real, tangible archaeological evidence that proves the historical existence of Jesus Christ from the Christian Bible, and why that evidence has been disputed and actively covered up by none other than members of the Christian faith. And in the process of that, what should have been the single most holy archaeological find ever in the Christian faith has turned into one of its biggest nightmares. In specific, I'm referring to the physical remains of Jesus Christ in the tomb where they recovered them from. There's a lot to unpack here, and I think the best place to start is with this.
זה היום שישי לקראת צהריים. ממש מול החלון של הבית זה היה אתר בנייה שהתחילו לבנות אותו. כדי לבנות היו עושים פיצוצים בהר, היו מפוצצים עם דינמיט את ההר, ואז בתור ילדים מסקרנות רצנו לראות מה קורה ואיפה זה. ואחרי שהיה את הפיצוץ וכל האבק שקע, מה שראיתי בעצם מרחוק בהר, ראיתי את איזה מערת קבורה, יש לה משולש עם העיגול, וזה היה הרבה יותר מכוסה.
In the spring of 1980, in Tel Piot, South Jerusalem, construction blasting exposed the entrance to a burial tomb. It was 2,000 years old. Gibson's detailed plan recorded every inch of the tomb's interior. Extending out from a large inner chamber were 6 deep cavities called loculi, or kochim in Hebrew. And inside these kochim, the archaeologists found 10 small limestone coffins, also called ossuaries. The ossuaries were quickly transferred to Jerusalem's Rockefeller Museum under the direction of the Israel Department of Antiquities. The bones and remains found inside were bagged and boxed and put aside for reburial.
Certain decisions were made by the Israel Antiquities Authority that they would heed to the requests of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Jerusalem and give over bone material which had been analyzed and examined by anthropologists for reburial.
And then they began the process of cataloging the ancient bone boxes. By 1980, over 1,000 ossuaries had been found, but only 20% of them bore the names of the dead. Here it was discovered that 6 out of the 10 ossuaries had inscriptions.
They are not monumental inscriptions. They're not intended to be seen and viewed by everybody, and they're not there to commemorate the dead. They are there so that when family members come in and start shifting the boxes around so they can put a new one in, they know which one is which and which belongs to who.
The archaeological record shows that the custom of using ossuaries for burial in Jerusalem only lasted for about 100 years, ending around 70 of the Common Era when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. And so the discovery of inscriptions on stone coffins like these provide archaeologists with a catalog of names specific to the time of Jesus. And on one of the ossuaries discovered in the Tel Piot tomb, written in Aramaic, was an astonishing name: Yeshua bar Yosef.
Yeshua, or Jesus, son of Joseph. Yeshua bar Yosef.
I'm going to start by addressing the obvious. This video is going to present evidence that the tomb of Christ and his physical remains were most likely discovered in the 1980s, which, if you know anything about the Christian faith, then the issue with this is pretty obvious. Christians all around the world believe that after Christ was crucified, that he arose from the dead 3 days later and ascended to heaven. Finding his physical remains would obviously challenge that. And to that, I would say that when we're discussing stories that describe events written thousands of years ago, I think it would be fair to say that those accounts were written by people who had a very different understanding of the world than we do today. There is a very real possibility that those accounts may have been altered over time. I just don't think it's fair to put a modern interpretation on those stories as literal, or at the least literal in the way that we see it now. It could have been very possible that Christ's ascension could have been an entirely spiritual event, and after all, logically, why wouldn't it be? In the end, I'm not going to discuss the theology of Christianity or supernatural concepts. This video is going to present the idea that the historical Christ most likely was a physical person and thus would have left behind physical remains. The tomb in question was discovered in Talpiot, Israel in the 1980s while construction crews were excavating for a building project. Now, at the time, there was a lot of development taking place in Israel, so the tomb kind of went largely unnoticed, except for the fact that it had a very large and strange symbol above the door. That particular symbol was used on literally countless early Christian graves, and although the exact meaning of the symbol has been lost to history, we know that it was very significant to early Christians. So, when the tomb in Talpiot was uncovered and this mysterious symbol that's often referred to as a chevron was emblazoned above the entrance, it was pretty obvious that whoever's tomb it was important to the early Christian movement. And the evidence found inside of this tomb most certainly didn't disappoint. But in order to understand that evidence, there has to be some context here, in specific about the burial practice that took place during the time of Christ. Because for roughly 100 years, during the exact same time that Christ lived, the practice after someone died was to wrap their body in a sheet and place it inside of a tomb for a year. This, however, was not meant to be a permanent tomb. It was just a place for the body to be left to decompose. And after that year, the tomb would be opened and the bones would be placed inside of a small stone box called an ossuary, at which point that box would be placed inside of a family tomb. And since that burial practice only took place for roughly a 100-year time frame during the time of Christ, if a tomb containing ossuaries is found, it's almost certainly from the rough time period when Jesus Christ lived. So let's take a look at the ossuaries that were inscribed with names that were found inside of the Talpiot tomb, and why those specific ossuaries make a very compelling argument that this was in fact the tomb of Christ.
If the ossuary found in the Talpiot tomb, marked Jesus, son of Joseph, did at one time contain the mortal remains of Jesus, then all the ossuaries in that tomb would have to belong to members of the Jesus family. On the other 5 ossuaries reported to have inscriptions, we should only expect to find names from the family tree of Jesus. Jesus was the son of Mary and Joseph. But what many people don't know is that according to Christian tradition, he had 2 sisters, Miriam and Salome. And the Gospel of Matthew tells us he had 4 brothers, Simon, Judah, James, and Joseph. His adoptive father, Joseph, was descended from King David. But Joseph most likely died in Nazareth and would have been buried there, not in Jerusalem. Jesus' mother Mary, Maria in antiquity, was also of Davidic descent. But unlike Joseph, according to later Christian tradition, she died in Jerusalem. And within the same tomb as Jesus, son of Joseph, a second name was discovered.
First, there was Jesus, son of Joseph, and I think the significance there is pretty obvious. I would like to point out, however, that Jesus, or how it was pronounced back in the day, Yeshua, was actually a very common name at the time, so finding an ossuary with that name wouldn't be uncommon. But finding a Yeshua, or Jesus, who was the son of Joseph, who also existed in the same area and time as Christ, obviously narrows that field down quite a bit. But let's continue. There was also a Mary, and not just a Mary, but the Latin version of Mary. So now we have a Jesus who was the son of Joseph and a Mary all in the same tomb.
As you can see, the script is very simple. The Hebrew letters that create this name are Mem. Mem is for M. Reish, like R. Yud can be I or Y. And Hey in Hebrew, it's like H in Latin. English. That makes Maria.
Maria.
And it's one of the rare examples of that name on ossuary in Israel.
Maria, Mary, found in the same family tomb as Jesus, son of Joseph. Could this be the Virgin Mary's ossuary? Throughout history, from the first Greek writings of Mark, the earliest gospel, the Virgin Mary's name has come down to us in only one form, Maria. It is a Latinized version of the Hebrew, Miriam. After Jesus' death, Mary continued with his teachings and must have gathered a large following. In those times of religious transition, Roman converts also began to follow Jesus, and so as her popularity grew amongst his followers, Mary's name was Latinized. That is why the New Testament records her name as Maria. Written in Hebrew, the name Maria is very rare, but it's exactly what was found on the ossuary in the Talpiot tomb.
Then we have Jose, which is only seen in one other historical text, which was in the Bible as Jesus' brother.
And then on an ossuary found deep within the tomb, another name was discovered.
This inscription says Yosa, with a hey in the end. It's a diminutive of Yosef. There is no question about it. As an ossuary inscription, this would probably be quite unusual.
If I'm publishing in English, I say, oh, okay, there's a Joseph. Well, there's not just a Joseph. It's Yosei. Now, in Hebrew, Yossi in Israel today is quite common. Yossi, Joseph, like Joey. But Yosei you will never hear. And you didn't hear it in the ancient world either. The Yod, the E becomes a Yosei. Guess where we know that name? In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has a brother. People don't all know that Jesus had brothers. Most scholars, the Roman Catholic Church says they were cousins, and other people, they were stepbrothers. But most of the historians and the biblical scholars have pretty well now admitted Jesus had brothers. They're named in the Gospels, the four brothers, James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon. But the Joseph in Mark, only in Mark, our earliest Gospel, is not Joseph. It's Yosei.
Yosei, or Josie in the English, was the brother of Jesus. But the Gospels don't tell us much more than that. He disappears after 3 brief citations. What happened to Yosei is a mystery. But if the ossuaries from the Talpiot tomb belong to the Jesus family, then Yosei has finally been found. Of all the ossuary inscriptions ever discovered, there is only one with this unique spelling of the nickname Yosei.
Look, clear as day, it's Josie. And that's an incredible thing, because according to Jewish law, if someone has a nickname, you have to put their nickname on their tombstone or casket. And it's the nickname that appears here right next to Jesus, son of Joseph. The brother was known as Josie, not Joseph, and it's exactly in the same configuration right here. Josie, Yosa.
Then we have James, and this ossuary is under a lot of scrutiny. James was another one of Jesus' brothers, so this name being in the crypt would be massive, but not necessary. The argument is that this ossuary had actually been added after the fact, either to add to the lore that this was Jesus' tomb or for some other reasons. Either way, this ossuary was cataloged as having come from the Talpiot tomb.
Now, a lot of people have concluded, experts, that the James ossuary is a forgery, but nobody says it's all a forgery. And the position now of the Israel Antiquities Authority is that it originally said James, son of Joseph. I would be fine with that. I mean, you think about it. We've got these 6 names. If the James, son of Joseph, forget brother of Jesus. See what the ossuary says, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Some people say, well, the brother of Jesus, maybe that was added. It wouldn't matter. Obviously, it'd be the brother of Jesus. You got a Jesus, a Joseph, a James, son of Joseph.
We have Matthew. Mary Magdalene had many Matthews in her family, and it's very possible one of them could have been buried with her. And especially after Christ's death, Mary may have well been a revered figure at that time, and there most likely would have been a lot of people who sought out her favor.
Look, Matthew. Look, Felix. M-T-Yud-Hey, so Mattia.
Mattia, which is a short form, a nickname, if you wish, of Matithya or Matityahu, which is where we in English got the name Matthew.
I'll tell you something very interesting. There are 2 genealogies of Jesus. Everybody reads the formal genealogy of Joseph, his adoptive father. It's basically all the kings of Israel and on down. Well-known, great historic names. But the other genealogy is embedded in Luke. People don't notice it much. It's Luke chapter 3. You got to turn a few pages. It's Mary's genealogy, the mother. And in her genealogy, guess what? You have 5, 6, 7, 8 Matthews. Matthias. It's a Maccabean, Hashmonean name. It's a fierce name of a sort of a kingly family. It's a priestly name. You remember, Mary is related to Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, who's a priest. So she's got some priestly connections there, as well as Judah, which is the tribe of the Davidic Messiah. So I don't think it's odd that we would have a Matthew in this tomb at all. In fact, it's sort of one more congruence and fitting together.
Then there was an ossuary found with the name Mara Mariamne, which is Greek for Mary known as the Master. And the name Mariamne is only found in one historical text, which was the Acts of Philip describing Mary Magdalene.
The inscription has two parts. The second part reads Mara, while the first part is a diminutive of Mariamne. And although no one had ever seen this name on an ossuary, it was translated as just another version of Mary. Mary, also known as Mara. But would it make sense to find in the Jesus family tomb two ossuaries with the name Mary? First, Maria, the name used in the Gospels to refer to the Virgin Mother. And the second, a unique spelling of both Mary and the name Mara. It might make sense if the second Mary, this Mariamne, was Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene comes down to us in the New Testament as not just a name, but a name and title. According to scholars, she is Mary from Magdala, Mary Magdalene. Magdala was an important trade center close to the Sea of Galilee. The people from Magdala would have spoken Greek as well as Aramaic. Christian traditions suggest that Mary Magdalene and her brother Philip were preachers to the Greek-speaking Jews. And it's quite likely that Mary Magdalene's family and followers would have written her name in Greek. The Mariamne ossuary is the only one found in the Talpiot tomb with a Greek inscription. If the Mariamne inscription could be connected to Mary Magdalene, it would be more than interesting. It would be statistically compelling because we could create a combined probability equation for the Talpiot cluster that includes Mariamne.
What happens when you do that is that the individual probability factors, even though they're not terribly small in any one particular case, when you multiply them all together, it actually starts to build up a picture that the overall thing that you've seen is actually a very rare event.
Mary of Magdala was a major apostle on a par with Peter at the time of Jesus. But later, after the New Testament, we say she's a prostitute. So the opposition to Mary of Magdala inside the New Testament and after the New Testament is the surest proof for me that she was very, very important.
The strong leadership displayed by Magdalene would have been regarded as suspect by an evolving, male-dominated church. So from the 2nd century, when church fathers began suppressing dozens of early Christian writings, the church rejected two texts that held Mary Magdalene in highest regard: the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and a text describing her brother's ministry, the Acts of Philip. For centuries, only fragments of these texts remained, and some sections had been considered lost forever. In 1974, in an ancient monastery on Mount Athos in Greece, a Harvard University professor, Francois Bovon, uncovered a 700-year-old manuscript. It was the most complete copy ever found of the 4th century text, the Acts of Philip. In it, Bovon claims to have discovered an early description of Mary Magdalene, unmarked by later Christian tradition.
In the Acts of Philip, she is completely, there is no mention of her previous life. She is seen positively as a Christian missionary. So she is completely at the same level as male missionaries. She preaches, she teaches, she baptizes, she carries even the title apostle.
If in the early Christian movement Mary Magdalene was an apostle, then the unique alias Mara on Mariamne's ossuary could be pointing to something extraordinary. In Aramaic, Mara means master.
Mara, the master. Even today, if you go to the Armenian quarter, the archbishop or one of the priests would be like Mar Samuel or Mar whatever, Lord, Master. You can still hear it. So it's a sign of respect for a rabbi, for a teacher, related to the Mara, the Lord, the Master.
It is clear in the Acts of Philip that Mary Magdalene is respected as a preacher, baptizer, and apostle, strong and faithful, and close to Jesus. It would make sense then for her followers to refer to her as Mara, Master. But what about the spelling of the first name in the inscription, the unique Mariamne, never found before or since on any other ossuary? In the Acts of Philip, Mary Magdalene's name is spelled M-A-R-I-A-M-N-E, Mariamne.
Mariamne is the same woman as Mary of Magdala or Mary Magdalene in the Synoptic Gospels and in some non-canonical texts like the Gospel of Mary, Pistis Sophia, etc.
Then we have Judah bar Yeshua, which translates literally to Judas, son of Jesus, which is just, well, I think that speaks for itself.
During the rushed excavations in 1980, archaeologists removed from the Talpiot tomb the last ossuary with an inscription. The ossuary belonged to a child. At the IAA Rockefeller Museum, the inscription was translated, Yehuda bar Yeshua.
Yes, Yehuda bar Yeshua comes into English as Judah, son of Jesus.
Judah, son of Jesus. The New Testament doesn't say that Jesus had a son, but perhaps in this instance, archaeology forces us to throw a different light on the New Testament. Could this bone box have once held the remains of the son of Jesus and Mary Magdalene? If Judah was their son, his existence would most certainly have been kept secret. Since Jesus was perceived to be a pretender to the royal throne, Jesus' son would have been a target of arrest and crucifixion by Roman authorities. It was a time of great persecution. Anyone associated with Jesus' ministry was threatened. His cousin, John the Baptist, beheaded. James, the brother of Jesus, stoned to death. Simon, another brother, crucified. If they were parents, Jesus and Mary would have known that leaking knowledge of the birth of their child would have put the child at terrible risk. So perhaps the unnamed beloved disciple referred to in the book of John is actually the son of Jesus. Who remains unnamed in the text to conceal the child's lineage. In John 19:26, Jesus asks the beloved disciple at the base of the cross to behold his mother. He then says to Mary,
Eva,
"Woman, behold your son." Traditionally, this scene has been understood as Jesus addressing Mary, his mother. But can this be later theology? Could it be that Jesus was talking to Mary Magdalene, his wife, asking her to protect their son?
And if all of that isn't enough for you, the manner of death for Jesus was actually inscribed on the side of his ossuary, and you guessed it, it was a cross.
There's an X here before the name, and then the name Yeshua, then the father's name is perfectly clear, Yehoseph, the son of Joseph.
On the ossuary marked Jesus, son of Joseph, directly before the name Jesus, is a deliberate inscription of a Tau.
That cross is absolutely part of the original inscription. It's the same depth and style of the inscription, plus the mineral vaporization, clearly going deep into all the letters.
Now, again, these were common names at the time. Finding a name like Jesus or Mary in an ossuary isn't in and of itself compelling. The argument is that finding all of these names in the same tomb from the same place at the same time period is extremely significant. In other words, if someone in the distant future was to find a grave with your name on it one day, that could easily just be a coincidence. But if someone was to find a grave with your name on it, surrounded by the specific names of your 6 closest family members, with dates all on the graves from the time you lived in the same town that you and all of your family lived in, it would be almost certain that it was your grave.
Accordingly, we would have to believe that living around the same time, in the same place, there was another Jesus, who also had a father named Joseph, and 2 close male relatives named James and Jose, and 2 women in his life, one called Maria and the other Mariamne.
In the end, any actual research into this tomb is basically impossible now. The Israeli Antiquities Society shut down the archaeological studies basically the moment they realized some historians were suggesting that it might be Christ's tomb. So they filled the tomb with Torahs and built an apartment building over top of it. Christian priests and theologians absolutely lost their minds and did basically everything in their power to refute and shut down any conversation of the tomb. Mainly because, as I mentioned earlier, in the New Testament, Christ arose from the dead 3 days after he'd been killed, and then he ascended to heaven, which would obviously be a supernatural event, so I don't understand why it couldn't also be possible for Christ to have spiritually arisen and appeared to his followers, but again, that's a theological debate that doesn't really belong in this video. I guess we're never gonna know. And possibly the single most important historical discovery in the history of Christianity has been buried under a building, all in the hopes that people might forget that it ever even existed. And I can't help but feel incredibly sad about that. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section below. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching.